Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss, where today I am ranking the 16 characters in the new Stephen King adaptation, the Stand series on CBS All Access. This will be a spoiler-free ranking, so if you're trying to decide if you should watch the new adaptation of the Stand series, this is probably the perfect video to do that. I will be comparing these character depictions to the characters in the book, as well as the 1994 miniseries when applicable, and letting you know what I thought of the performance of each. Being a big fan of both the book and the series from the 90s, I was very excited for this new adaptation to be released, especially given some of the names in the cast. The Stand is an enormous tale about good versus evil in a post-outbreak apocalypse that Stephen King wrote as a love letter to the Lord of the Rings, trying to adapt the classic story with a modern take when it was published in 1978. The book was a great success, especially given the length, and propelled King to unmatched success as a novel writer whose works could be adapted quickly to both movies and miniseries. After the success of the adaptation of the book It and various others, The Stand was greenlit as a miniseries in the early 90s after being in development hell as a feature film almost since the book's release, and debuted with 4 two-hour episodes to critical acclaim. One of the highlights of both the novel and the miniseries are the fascinating characters we meet along the way, and those characters are who I would like to discuss today. Also, The Stand has an immense cast, so I picked out the 16 characters I thought were most important to the plot. This is just my list, so let me know who you think are the best characters in the comments below, because I would love to talk about one of my favorite books of all time with you. Okay, so let's get into ranking the 16 characters in the new Stand CBS All Access miniseries. Number 16, Alexander Skarsgård as Randall Flagg. Yep, I'm going to come out swinging on this video and list one of the main actors as the worst of the bunch. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I think the performance of Jamie Sheridan in the 1994 miniseries is pitch perfect. It continues to stand, forgive the pun, as one of my favorite adaptations of a character from print to screen that I have ever seen. So Alexander Skarsgård definitely had big boots to fill, but in my opinion, his performance is a big swing and miss. What made Sheridan's performance so great was that it was very nuanced, to the point where you almost catch yourself liking the man before he turns into a demon and rips someone's head off. It was that folksy, greasy, small-town politician aspect of the role that made him so entrancing, and you just don't get that with this new Randall Flagg. In Stephen King's books, he goes by many names, of course, and I feel like we only see the Dark Man and never see the Walking Dude in this series. Honestly, it made me think of the character Skarsgård is most well known for, which is the gothic vampire Eric from the True Blood series, and if that is what the producers wanted to go with, then they got the right guy. But in my opinion, this Randall Flagg does not hold a candle to the performance by Sheridan or the character from the novel. Number 15, Ezra Miller as the Trash Can Man. Another swing and miss on one of my favorite characters from the book. Ezra Miller's performance as a trash can man is a waste and honestly is borderline offensive. The reason I take offense with his performance, and I could be wrong with this because this is of course my interpretation, but it seems like Ezra Miller plays the character as mentally disabled, and I do not like the connotations behind that kind of decision with the character. While in the book he is shown to be a pyromaniac at a young age, he is then abused for years, which leads to his schizophrenic condition, and that is really glossed over in the series. He isn't simply like this because of his mental issues, the world threw him away because of them, and that is never really conveyed in the new series. His whole performance is really over the top, especially since we never get a chance to feel sorry for him because we just see him as this insane thing. For instance, in the book, Trash breaks his wrist but it never gets to set so his hand becomes deformed. But that is never mentioned in the series, so when we see him with his deformed hand, we are meant to think that it is just part of his mental illness. Matt Frewer, I thought, played the character in a much more sympathetic manner, which made up for some of the story points that were lost from the book. In fact, the only reason Ezra Miller is not last on this list is because most of the best scenes of him from the book are omitted from the series, so he did not get as much a chance as most of the others to develop his character, but given his performance, that may have been a good thing. 14. Heather Graham as Rita Blakemore. Rita Blakemore is an interesting character because she is someone who survives an outbreak that kills off 99% of the population, but instead of moving forward, she wishes she was one of them. I remember reading this book for the first time in school and not really understanding her character and why she wouldn't be grateful, but the experience of life has shown me that Rita Blakemore is meant to be the representation of what fear can still do to someone even when they are blessed with something great. Everyone has a tendency to look at others and think that they have it all, having no idea what anxiety and other issues trouble them. Rita is someone who did seem to have it all before the outbreak, and because of this cannot move on. To her, this loss is worse than the loss of her loved ones, everyone else, and even her own life. Her part is not large, and in fact, in the 1994 series, her story was added to that of Nadine Cross, but film star Heather Graham takes on the role in the CBS All Access series. I thought that she was well cast for the role, as I totally buy her as a former member of New York high society, and she is very meaningful to the development of the Larry Underwood character. But her last scene I did not find as stirring as it is in the book, and that is what I was waiting for since we did not see it in the 1994 miniseries, and when that fell flat, so did the character for me. Number 13, Odessa Young as Franny Goldsmith. Odessa Young's performance as Franny Goldsmith is a curious one to me, because it seems that the writers decided to make some changes to her character in the CBS All Access miniseries that in my opinion made her a lot less likable. She is meant to be a 21-year-old woman who gets pregnant right before the outbreak, and basically the 9 months of her pregnancy pace the story from the initial outbreak to the ultimate stand. But in my opinion, her character is written much more naive and optimistic in the book than was portrayed here. In fact, throughout this series, I think she does more to develop the Harold Lauder character into the man he becomes than anything else. And given all her actions, I started wondering to myself if she should be in Las Vegas instead of Boulder. Molly Ringwald definitely pulled off the deer in headlights innocence of the character in the 1994 miniseries, and really my only gripe with that performance was that she had no chemistry with the man she ends up with, which is something that this version also shares, as I got more of an uncle and niece vibe from her and the man she ends up with. Really, all this performance did was make me feel sorry for Harold, and if that was the purpose, then mission accomplished, but I don't think that it did her character any favors. Number 12, Whoopi Goldberg as Mother Abigail. One of the two main powers in the story, Mother Abigail works as the vessel to communicate God's will to the new inhabitants of Boulder and is the ultimate rival of Randall Flagg. Usually more accustomed to taking in the view, Whoopi Goldberg joined the cast of The Stand early on and played one of the most important roles in the story, as she is the person responsible for gathering the side of the good against the tyranny of evil and trying to keep them from losing their way. Next to Jamie Sheridan's performance, I thought Ruby Dee's performance as Mother Abigail was one of the best of the miniseries, and yes, I'm one of the idiots who watched the first time and thought to themselves, how did they get this old lady to do all these things, not realizing it was an actress in heavy makeup. Whoopi Goldberg did a fine job also in heavy makeup, but it was a bit unbalanced, much like Skarsgård's performance of Flagg, as I felt that we saw the wrath of Mother Abigail more than her smile, which I thought would have made the character more enjoyable to watch. Ruby Dee seemed so welcoming when people stopped by hemming for home, and you could feel the warmth of her character through the screen, and I didn't really feel that from Goldberg's performance. Number 11, Amber Heard as Nadine Cross. First, I'm going to say that I'm going to rate this performance on the performance and not on the stories in the press about the actress. Nadine Cross is really a tragic character and is one of the many in The Stand that it seems never really had a chance at a normal life. She is constantly conflicted by the two sides warring within her and ultimately is put in a position where she has no good choice to make. Laura San Giacomo played the role in the 1994 miniseries, and I never really liked her as I thought she overacted the part. I thought Amber Heard's performance to be more subtle and more believable, as by the end of her arc, I really did feel sorry for her. She also did not have a hard time making believable connections with the male characters she interacts with, and I believe the allotted chemistry that she had with each man. I found her performance though in Boulder to be a bit lacking, as it's obvious throughout each scene that something is wrong with her, and she barely tries to hide it. Also, there were some makeup choices with her towards the latter part of the series that look almost funny, as in one scene I swear she looks like Evan Peters' character from the first scene of American Horror Story. Number 10, James Marsden as Stu Redman. Meant to be the Frodo of this fellowship, Stu Redman is the everyman trying to lead everyone and stay out of the way at the same time. He's probably the character we follow the most, and he's there for most of the big moments of the story. In the 1994 series, he was played by Gary Sinise, who is still a year away from being known as Lieutenant Dan in the film blockbuster Forrest Gump. And while his performance is fine, he really is just being Gary Sinise throughout the series. He is also another actor that has a hard time developing chemistry with the opposite sex, and unfortunately that occurs again here with the performance of James Marsden. In most cases though, I find myself preferring the performance of Sinise, except in the scenes with Glenn Bateman. In the books, it is made to seem like Larry Underwood and Stu bond, but in the series, I think the strongest bond is built between Glenn and Stu, and I really like seeing them two work together. Honestly, those were some of my favorite scenes in the series, and why I put him this high on the list, but when Marsden doesn't have Greg Kinnear to work with, his performance just gets lost in the background. Number 9, Nat Wolff as Lloyd Henry. This one is an odd one to gauge because it is another case where the new series made changes to the character, and in this case I thought they really do not pay off until the end. In fact, I initially had the performance of Nat Wolff as Lloyd Henry much further down on this list because of these changes, but I think by the end of the arc the character's motivations make more sense and does show growth. I'm sorry, I know this is incredibly cryptic, but I'm trying to give you a spoiler-free analysis. What I can say is that while Lloyd is involved in many of the same scenes as his character was from the book and the 1994 miniseries, his behavior is not always what you would expect. And while I was watching the performance, I kept thinking to myself, Why would Randall Flagg pick this guy to be his right-hand man? In the book and the earlier miniseries, it is made obvious that Lloyd is a ruthless sociopath who will follow Flagg no matter the cost. So while I think the performance makes sense given the character's motivations, I am still left asking myself why an all-powerful demon would have this numbnuts as his right-hand man. Number 8. Fiona Dorff as the Rat Woman. Up until this point, I've lamented about some characters who wasted the character they were given, but in Fiona Dorff's case, I think she made a background character extremely interesting and hard not to watch with her version of the Rat Woman. The Rat Woman was actually the Rat Man in the book and the 1994 miniseries, and is kind of just a shady henchman of the Las Vegas side who comes and goes in the story. But this new incarnation of a character crosses a cruise director with that crazy guy from Mad Max with the flamethrower guitar, and creates a role perfect for this style of hell. She is not given a backstory in the series, but given her ability to use and understand media, I'm guessing she may have been a producer or filmmaker, or heck, maybe even a YouTuber before the outbreak, and then took her talents to Las Vegas and became Randall Flagg's Master of Ceremonies. She is there to enact his plans at times, and does so usually in visually astounding fashion. I give Fiona Dorff a whole lot of credit for bringing this character to life, and I think her scenes are some of the best in Las Vegas. The only problem is that we do not get a lot of her, but her performance does put her on the better half of this list. Number 7. Jovan Adepo as Larry Underwood. Larry Underwood is probably the character that goes through the most growth throughout the story, starting as a struggling narcissistic musician who gets their first hit right before the outbreak, to a soulful caring man pondering his place in the world. We follow Larry on his journey from New York to Boulder and elsewhere, and along the way he interacts with most of the main characters on both sides of the story. I thought the performance by Jovan Adepo brought a lot of life to the character, and in fact I saw more of the character from the book the further along the story went. It is obvious that at the beginning of the story he's a man used to running from all his problems, whether it be by being on the road as a musician or just drug use, but by the end of the story he is ready to make the ultimate stand based on faith. I thought that this performance was probably one notch higher than that of Adam Stroke from the 1994 miniseries, and I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I thought that that actor was the same actor as Captain Rhodes from the Day of the Dead until about 8 years ago. Number 6. Natalie Martinez as Dana Jurgens. Much like Fiona Dorff, I thought Natalie Martinez did a lot with a character that is only in the story for a few scenes. From the first scene we meet Dana Jurgens in the 2020 series until her last, we meet a strong character who is put in impossible situations and shows that she is strong enough to do what is needed. The 1994 miniseries did not really spend as much time on her, only really showing her in the very meaningful scene that shows the effects and limits of Randall Flagg's power, and is one of the most memorable in the story. But the character is given more to do in this new series and really brings a lot of life and emotion to the character. Her scenes in Vegas are very unnerving, as you are meant to feel like peril is around every corner, but Dana seems like a woman strong enough to the task, which she ultimately proves that she is. She is also involved in a very memorable scene in Las Vegas in which she looks very memorable. Moving on. Number 5. Catherine McNamara as Julie Lowry. Another character that was given more to do in the 2020 CBS All Access series, Catherine McNamara as Julie Lowry was a highlight for me in the series. I only know the actress from the CW show Arrow, so this was a big departure as the always horny maniacal debutante of Randall Flagg's Las Vegas crew. From her first scene on the road to Vegas until her scenes there, she really does a great job in making you hate her and fitting right in with Flagg's crew. Honestly, I think that some of the backbone that the Lloyd Henry character had in the books was transferred to Lowry's character, as she always seems much surer of herself than he does and is even able to manipulate him when needed. She plays the evil party girl part perfect, and in doing so created another example of the decadence of the world Randall Flagg is trying to propagate. Number 4. Brad William Henke as Tom Cullen. M-O-O-N, that spells Tom Cullen, the simple-minded, lovable man from Oklahoma that is one of the bright spots of this remarkably dark story. While he is developmentally disabled and is not able to read, he does seem to have some of the powers that Mother Abigail does and is able to commune with and be led by God, even if he isn't able to fully understand it. His story is one of my favorites from the book, and I very much enjoyed the performance of Bill Fagerbach from the miniseries in 1994, but I honestly think I may have enjoyed Brad William Henke's take even more, as I really thought he nailed a perfect performance of a man with developmental issues. Having only known the actor as the guy who tried to beat up Pam after she painted a butt on his truck, I did not know what to expect and did not have very high expectations for the role, but I immediately fell in love with the performance and wanted to see him in every episode. His relationship with Nick Andros is very heartwarming and really adds to the enjoyment of both characters. His scenes in Vegas are also very powerful and added a lot to the series. Number 3. Owen Teague as Harold Lauder. One of the focal points of the first 2 acts of the story, Owen Teague as Harold Lauder delivers a creepy and poignant performance on the stand. We meet him early on and follow him intently for a good portion of the story, as some of the other characters do as well, as they all try and make their way in this new world. I think that the one thing that the new series did that the other did not was make Harold Lauder a sympathetic character, and the performance of Owen Teague, who was also just in the recent Stephen King revival It, is a big reason for that. From the first episode, you can tell that there is something in his past that made him the way he is, and as we learn more about him, we see how the world has been very cruel to him throughout his life. I never did much care for the performance by Corin Nemec, as I thought he just came off as creepy and made Harold a one-sided character. But I do believe that one thing this series does right is that it makes Harold Lauder a much more relatable character and does him more justice from the prior iteration. Number 2. Greg Kinnear as Glenn Bateman. Another character who was changed slightly for the series, Greg Kinnear as Glenn Bateman was a pleasant addition to the story. Much like with the Harold Lauder character, I didn't particularly love the earlier performance of the character by Ray Walston, in that he seemed a bit too cynical and it made the character a bit flat. I think the personality of Kinnear comes out in this role and makes him more believable and likable. He is also involved in a stirring scene towards the end, which again differs from the book, but still lands well and his performance really shines there. I also really enjoyed his relationship with the other characters on his side and the other, as he seemed to be able to pick at the thing that each did or did not want to hear and bring it to light. Honestly, I think he was the most likable character, and given his propensity to be the dissenting voice of reason in the group, that is quite an accomplishment, as more often than not, we saw him arguing or straight up fighting with other characters. But in the end, I think Greg Kinnear proved to be a fine addition to the cast and played the character in a memorable way. Number 1. Henry Zaga as Nick Andros. If you are surprised that I have Henry Zaga as Nick Andros this high, then you are still probably not as surprised as I am that I enjoyed this performance this much, because I truly do think this was my favorite depiction of any character in the story because of how the actor's performance resembled the character from the book. Rob Lowe played the character very well in the first series, but Nick Andros is supposed to be a man that the world has thrown away multiple times and would not look at twice to help, and it is hard to look at Rob Lowe and think that. In the source material, Nick grows up in an orphanage because his parents die at separate times and is constantly bullied. He is almost a mere reflection of the story of the Trash Can Man, except Nick still tried to walk towards the light instead of succumbing to the Dark Man. The only thing I had seen Henry Zaga in before this was The New Mutants, which was not good, so I was ready to hate this portrayal and ended up being blown away by it. He really made me feel like this was a broken man who still got up every day and kept going forward. He also shared chemistry with every character he interacted with, which made for some of the most powerful scenes in the new series. After watching him here, I'm looking forward to seeing what Henry Zaga is in next, which is a complete reversal of what I had thought beforehand. Well, that's my ranking, so let me know, what did I miss? This is always more fun when I hear from you, so let me know in the comments what you thought of the series and how you'd rank the characters. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?